So we're here with Tom Clement today. Hi, Tom.
Hello, good morning.
And we are going to discuss entrepreneurship coaches. So, if you're an entrepreneur and you are wondering about this coaching subject and what you can do with it and how to act with a coach and how to actually take advantage and benefit from all that a coach has to offer, or wants to know a realistic expectation also about what coaches don't have to offer, this is the right place to be listening right now. So um, let's start with a little, very brief introduction of both of us. Tom, do you want to start?
Sure. I am Tom Clement, and I'm an assistant professor of management and entrepreneurship at Minnesota State University, Mankato, which is about an hour south of the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul. I'm also an entrepreneur. I work primarily in sort of the contracting real estate space. And that's kind of a side project for me mostly, but I also work with a lot of entrepreneurs and I'm quite active on LinkedIn. And yeah, I've been teaching entrepreneurship now. This is my 21st year. So it's been a good run, and I've spent a lot of time sort of doing side projects as well. So I always keep my foot in that entrepreneurial space as well. Inga, let's hear about
Great.
you.
Yeah. So my name is Inge de Dreu. I am have been an entrepreneurship coach for over 10 years now. Currently, I'm focusing on the Playground for Entrepreneurs, which is a coaching tool, and I'm focusing almost exclusively, with a little exception, on the coaches themselves and on how to implement this gamified method. And that was developed on the basis of my experience as an entrepreneurship coach, and also working with universities, a couple of universities in Colombia and also a University of Applied Sciences in the Netherlands, focusing mostly on innovation and entrepreneurship, anything between those two subjects, really. Great. So let's get started.
Yes.
I'd like to start with a proverb that we use sometimes in Colombia, and that is the eye can't see itself, right? So that's very much applicable to coaching, as far as I'm concerned, because the thing is that even if you know your entrepreneurial space very well, even if you read all the books about entrepreneurship and the different methods and how you should experiment and everything, there's always blind spots. There's always things that you can't see, even if you've been an entrepreneur for several ventures. If you've taken a couple of ventures from the ground, then people still have some sort of coach around them, some sort of person who looks from the outside, who asks questions, invites reflection. And that is really the value of a coach, to invite for reflection.
And I hear that so often in a variety of different contexts. Like for instance, the last couple of weekends, American football has gotten is very big, obviously in the United States, and we've sort of gotten our season going. And you look at the coaching staff on a lot of football teams, a lot of them sit up high in the press box and look down on the field because they get a better observational view of what's going on in the game, and then they can use their headsets and microphones to report down to the head coach or the people on the field what they see going on. And that's sort of a great sort of metaphor for entrepreneurial coaching, is being able to stand outside of that box and see what's going on inside of it, and being able to offer a different perspective to the entrepreneur as to what they see as coaches or as mentors or whatever their role might be going on in that organization. Because it's really hard. I can attest to the fact that it's really hard as an entrepreneur when you're grinding every day, working
Yeah.
15, 20-hour days in some cases, to see clearly what's going on or what some of the root causes might be of the problems that you're encountering. Or even on a positive note, like, how should we expand this? How should we grow this business from the perspective of somebody else's point of view? And that's so important in the coaching space.
Yes, it's so very easy to get caught in like daily working long hours very often, having a lot of stress or a lot of responsibility, and a coach just helps you to kind of get out of that space for a moment and to look at it from another angle and to see things that you might not have seen, or to get to insights that you need, right, in order to progress or set up your venture.
It goes back to that old E-Myth quote that I've probably used in every one of our webcasts: work on your business, not in your business. That was one of the big things that made that book so famous, was that one phrase or that one line in the book: work on your business, not in your business. Don't be an employee of your business,
Yeah,
in the sense that you're so far down in the trenches that you're not able to see from a managerial perspective how to grow and innovate in your business. And
definitely.
sometimes in the beginning, that's a lot easier said than done for the first few years of a venture. And that's where a coach can play a really huge role in sort of helping you get that other perspective that you need until you're able to provide some of that perspective to yourself
Yes,
as you
definitely.
mature. So,
So let's go into like the different supportive roles, the different people who might be supporting an entrepreneur, right? So there's a couple of professionals that we can define in that sense. Coach is probably the most common one, the most used one, the one that's available through big government programs. Right. There's also
right.
mentors and consultants or advisors.
And in the United States, I sort of became very aware of this early on. I had a coach in my first venture, and we have an organization in the United States that we call SCORE. It stands for Service Corps of Retired Executives, and these are basically just retired business people that volunteer to help young small business people and entrepreneurs get going in that coaching role. They actually, ironically, kind of refer to their folks as mentors. They call them SCORE mentors, but they're really coaches. So I had a really early experience with those individuals. And again, it was that second eye, that second set of eyes to look at your business plan and to look at the things that you were planning to do. And so that was very much a coaching role from a definitional perspective. Now in the United States, I know you were talking about, you can discuss sort of the translational issue with this, but the word mentor generally refers to maybe something a bit deeper,
Yeah.
a bit more long term. Usually when you have a mentor in business, it's somebody that you've known for a while. If you think of that old metaphor, that old cliche, taking someone under your wing, that's really what a mentor does, is they sort of take you under their wing. So in that regard, it might be somebody that you've known for a long time. It might be a relative that's a business person, or somebody very close to you, and then you sort of move over one more step into the consulting role, which is very much a pay per kind of role. It's not usually a voluntary type of thing. You're usually hiring a consultant, and it's very much a job related role where you're trying to do something very specific in your business, like expand or buy out another business or whatever, and they're providing advice. And then the other thing, like you and I talked about this morning before we got on the air, it's much more of a quantitative thing too.
Yeah.
Mentoring and coaching are maybe perhaps a bit more qualitative, more of a counseling kind of relationship, whereas consulting is very much a job related, quantitative. Here's the numbers, here's the information that you need to make a decision. So that's some of the differentiation there.
Yes. I remember in Colombia, we actually use those words mentor and coach. Just the opposite,
Okay.
right?
Yep.
So we had mentors, or we would call them mentors. They would be in English, they would be coaches, to actually accompany during a set period of time. They would be paid because we would require them to dedicate time on this and to get to results. So those would be paid roles, but they would basically do coaching with the entrepreneurs during a fixed time. It used to be 8 weeks. And then there would be a method behind it,
Right.
right? So we would apply lean startup methods, and we would start with like a business model, and then we would go out and validate and everything. There would be a method behind the actual sessions. And even though those were personal one-on-one sessions, the method behind it was always very clear. So those are very, very different. And then we would have different consultants or advisors who may be accountants or legal or maybe design with kind of an expertise on one particular subject. And whenever they would need that particular expertise, then they could call in the advisor.
Right.
So that was very, very the difference between the roles.
Well, and
Now,
I say good morning to Greta real quick on the chat. She's a former student and somebody I've known for a long time. And she said finding a mentor is key in any role you're in. That's absolutely true. I mean, even if you have a coach and you've been coached as an entrepreneur, I think every entrepreneur should also have a mentor. And I also actually think those two individuals should be different people,
yeah,
perhaps, because they can be both provide a different perspective. We were just talking about academic advising. This is my advising week for my students as a teacher, and some of those roles turn into mentorship roles. They go beyond just strictly advising and helping students out to
yeah,
find their classes and whatever. And they actually grow into a longer term. I mean, one of my most rewarding things I do is I still get students contacting me even after graduation, looking for career advice or looking for sort of a way to move forward with a certain thing that they're working on in their life. And that's a really rewarding thing. And that's another thing I would say about mentoring. Mentoring for the mentor is really rewarding. Not
yeah,
that coaching can't be, but I think coaches see a lot more people, so they
yeah.
don't maybe form that personal relationship with some of their clients as a mentor would.
Yeah,
And mentoring is really rewarding, and you get to see that person grow and sort of become a full-fledged professional contributing to society or whatever it is that they're doing. And it's a really great deal.
definitely. Definitely. There's a lot more wisdom behind it, probably, right? There's less method, but there's more life lessons.
For sure.
There's more networking, I suppose. There's just a different value to to both of the roles, I would say.
Well, and like you mentioned with the coaching, there's a method. Like, for example, if I was to coach, which I do some coaching, I don't have as much time to do as much as I would like to do. But when I do it, I definitely coach more from a lean startup perspective
Yeah.
of, hey, let's get this business model figured out and let's use the business model canvas and let's get out there and talk to real people. So that's, everybody sort of has their little, sort of their little mini franchise that they work from, sort of that perspective that they like to work within. And that's and I have a good friend of mine who's a leadership coach, for example, and they coach leadership. I mean, I've talked to time management coaches that work in that
There's
space
all
quite a bit.
sorts. Yeah,
Yeah, there's
there's all
all
sorts of
sorts.
coaches. There's life coaches. There's ontological coaches. There's the
Right.
coaching space is just so big that it's worthwhile defining a little bit before you actually get going with a coach. Now,
Right.
let's talk a bit about the different programs and maybe particularly, Tom, the sophomore entrepreneurs opportunities, right?
Yes.
Because it doesn't end after the startup.
That's kind of how my passion with sophomore entrepreneurs started, was really looking at not only having been one myself and knowing what that feels like. When I talk about sophomore entrepreneurs real quick, I'm talking about entrepreneurs in their like second, third year of business, right in there. So now they're past that initial startup, excited hoopla kind of thing in the beginning, and now they're really into the thick of running a business. And one of the things when I talk to my coaching friends, and I have lots of friends that work for Score and SBDC and whatnot, they get really frustrated with the fact that entrepreneurs think that once the business starts, the coaching role is over or the relationship is over, and they're not allowed to go back and ask for help after the fact. And I know, Mike Hahn is a good friend of mine with the SBDC, and he's joined us many times on this webcast. And he says that the percentage of people they see after the business starts up is so small, comparatively speaking. Like if you look at all the clients that you've had and how many actually come back to you after the fact. So I would just encourage anyone out there that's either an entrepreneur or you're in a role where you can influence entrepreneurs, or maybe you're a coach and you're tuning into the webcast today, drive that point home over and over and over again, that the coaching role does not stop just because you sort of turned the open sign around on your business and you started. I mean, in fact, I would actually argue for me, as a one-time sophomore entrepreneur, that role would have almost been more important, because there's a lot of feeling around in the dark, sort of, metaphorically speaking, trying to find your way as an entrepreneur. And some of those coaches can provide great insight to help an entrepreneur move forward and make decisions. So that's really my sort of sophomore entrepreneurship drum that I keep beating, is go get help. Go find a coach to help you even after you get started.
And it's really the difference between operating a business and being an entrepreneur, right?
Right.
Because being an entrepreneur is about searching. And although maybe after the startup, you've figured out a large part of the business model, there might still be a lot of opportunities, bigger opportunities. Maybe you want to scale. Maybe you want to just pivot a small part of your business model. Maybe you need to explore some channels. Maybe a pandemic comes up and you need to change everything, right?
Yeah, we don't know anything about that at all.
We never know.
No.
Right? So there might be so many things that could either be your ambition or a circumstance that comes up, or you just haven't finalized figuring out your business model. And that's where a coach comes in.
Well,
right? If you're only
best,
operating, that's probably the end of it, because if you know how to operate and it's the only thing you want to do and you don't want anything else, well, you might not get any value. But as long as you're exploring, the coach is there to actually provide you a different angle.
Well, and that's one of the best parts about the lean startup method for me, was it differentiated very clearly the difference between a startup and an already existing business out there, and the fact that they're not the same. But that's the ironic part. A startup eventually has to turn into that existing business, or has to behave like one eventually. And that's where a coach, and and obviously a mentor too, because a lot of mentors come from that space, that already existing business world, and they can sort of help you operationalize that startup, and take that business model and turn it into a fully functioning business. Whereas that entrepreneur may not have the experience to do that on their own completely. And you spend a lot more time, like I said, sort of feeling around in the dark, trying to figure out what you're supposed to do. And I think that's lost. It's lost time and it's lost productivity. I think we could scale our businesses a lot faster and become a more mature venture much quicker if we did reach out and get help instead of trying to figure it out on our own.
Definitely. It's a much more efficient way of getting to where you want to be. So let's continue a bit with what you can expect, and also your coachability, what we call coachability.
Yes.
So a coach, if you get a coach, the coach doesn't necessarily always give you new information. That's not what coaching is about. It's not a university lecture sequence where every time you get new frameworks, every time you get new theories. It doesn't work like that. So a coach takes your personal situation, your venture, your idea, and then helps you bring it to the next level. And that path is different for everybody.
Right.
And the coach is there to help you reflect, to help you kind of stabilize your mental process, maybe, if that's necessary. But it's a really personal experience. So I have an example. At a certain point, I was coaching an entrepreneur, and he actually paid me for a coaching session. And when he came to the coaching session, he was telling me how many books he read about entrepreneurship. He knew all of the books, Alexander Osterwalder, and he knew Steve Blank's work, and he knew the Lean Startup and everything. He knew all the books of that time, and he hadn't applied anything of it.
Mm-hmm.
So what should he do was basically his question to me. Well, why don't you start applying it? No, but I know it, but I'm just past that point and I'm building my company. Right?
Right.
Doesn't make any sense, right? A coach is there not to give you new information all the time, because you can read the book, right? You don't need a coach for that. But in order to apply it, and maybe you've try to apply it in order to apply it better or get the right insights out of it. So you build your business model, and then the coach helps you to fine tune your business model and kind of come up with a couple of possible pivots and to validate and how you should do that, and
Right.
not doing it the wrong way. That's what a coach is for, right? To help you apply that knowledge. And if you don't have that knowledge, your coach will explain it to you. But even if you have that knowledge, well, the coach is there to help you apply. Right?
Right. And
So,
I have a bit of experience, a little bit of experience in the mental health therapy space, not only, firsthand experience, but also a good friend of mine, his wife is a licensed therapist, licensed psychologist. And one of the things you'll hear in that space a lot is just a simple 3-word challenge or phrase: do the work. In fact, a good therapist, sometimes if they tell you they would like to see you work on things and you come back to your next session and you haven't done any of those things, they'll end the session and walk away. They're not just going to sit there and keep you there for an hour or 30 minutes or whatever just to make extra money. You have to be willing to go out and do the work. And that's one of the things that I would really challenge entrepreneurs. When a coach makes suggestions to you, they're not really suggestions. A lot of times they're challenges. Go do the work. Go try at least what that coach is suggesting that you do, because they see something in your business venture that you're either not doing or should be doing or haven't done in the past, and that you should try to execute that, and see if it makes a difference in your venture. Otherwise, coaching sessions just turn into a catalog of complaints and worries, with very little progress forward. And one of the problems with coaching in the United States is a lot of it's voluntary. We don't necessarily have to pay for coaching, but I also think as entrepreneurs, we need to be mindful of that these individuals are volunteering their time for free. And you have to say that, you need to be much more coachable, as we talked about, and we can sort of transition into that. What does coachable mean to you, Inga?
Coachable to me means that an individual is open to suggestions. They will take the suggestions, they will think about it, they will digest it and then do what they consider is necessary. So it doesn't mean to take everything the coach says and literally do it,
right?
But to have some sort of critical thinking around it. Does this fit? Is this going to be insightful for me? And then apply it, right? And they would need to be open to that towards the coach, what they're going to do and how they're going to do it, what they're going to do about it.
Right.
And that way work with the suggestions of the coach, and together they can come to a decision of what to do, how to progress, what insights to take into account. It doesn't mean just blindly doing everything the coach says,
right?
But it's really about that communication and about being able to do whatever feels good for your business and being very open and communicative about it.
There's an old saying, the best leaders ask the best questions. I love that saying. I would actually say that about very coachable people. The most coachable people ask some of the best questions. So again, they don't just take everything their coach says at face value. They want to learn more, or they want to learn some context of how they can apply that to their own situation.
And in turn, a good coach uses questions and stories to get entrepreneurs to reflect on their process so they can come up with the insights themselves. Right? A good coach doesn't give you blindly advice, which is something that I see happening very often, especially on social media. People giving blind advice without really knowing anything about this entrepreneur or about this business or about the market even. Right? That's not something that a good coach would do. That for me, that's really a red flag to see coaches interact that way. They will first listen, and if anything, they will come up with advice later, but mostly the advice will come through reflective questions to the entrepreneurs so they can come up with their own insights.
Well, one of my favorite parts of teaching is that there's some days I learn just as much from my students as they learn from me, and I think a good coach should be that way too. A good
Yes.
coach should learn just as much from their entrepreneurs, and be able to adapt that to the way that they coach and the information that they provide. I wanted to address a question from Sim, another former student. Hi, Sim. Would you say coach is a mentor rather than a sponsor? Um, Sponsor to me just definitionally seems like someone that sort of actively goes out and puts you forward as an individual, sort of stands behind you. And I would say a coaching role is a bit more neutral than that.
Yes.
Mentor is more of a long-term advisory position almost. So if you have a mentor, if you talk to any good, executive or whatever, they say that they have a mentor, that person's probably been in their life for a really long time. Whereas coaches might come and go a bit more casually or a bit more cavalierly in their relationships, but they're maybe a little more short term. When I say short term, I'm not talking like a one-off necessarily, but they're definitely not hanging in there as long as a mentor would. Whereas a sponsor to me is more somebody that stands behind an entrepreneur. That could be a mentor, but it might be a little bit more casual than that. So again, there's a lot of semantics, sort of definitional things, depending on which culture you're in and which country you live in, and those sorts of things. Like you said, there's a translational thing between coaching and mentoring
Yes.
in Spanish, and so that there's a lot of little syntax, kind of contextual things that relate to that. But that's a great question.
Okay, so let's talk a bit about different types of coaching. We previously discussed peer coaching, and also I know that you want to mention AI as a way of getting coaching. That's
Yes,
very interesting because both of those ways, like peer coaching and AI coaching, are just so accessible,
peer
right?
coaching is yeah, just what it sounds like. Entrepreneurs helping other entrepreneurs. So I'm a huge advocate, for example, of excuse me, startup cohorts, where you get a bunch of people that want to start a business at roughly the same time. So you get them all sort of started at the same time so that they can bounce off of each other and work with each other in a peer role. That would be an example of peer coaching. I was a member of a 20 club back when I was a motorcycle dealer, which is an old General Motors thing from back in the 50s. And that's an example of a peer coaching environment. You're holding each other accountable and you're helping each other grow each other's business,
Yeah.
because you're all experiencing the same issues,
Yes.
just maybe in different contexts. The AI thing is something really interesting. I mean, most people that follow me on LinkedIn know that I sort of dove headfirst into this whole chat GPT thing several months ago. I definitely have not spent the time on it that some people have, but I definitely spent a lot of time on it and I've experimented a lot. And I read an article a couple months ago about using AI as a quasi mentor. So I started doing some experimenting with that, trying to put ChatGPT in the sort of persona of a mentor. It does a fairly good job. I have to say, I think about myself as the 25, 26-year-old entrepreneur sitting in my office at my business at 1 o'clock in the morning, trying to figure out a problem, and all my coaches have gone to bed, obviously, and I'm sitting there all by myself. That is where AI could play a really, really good role. Now, as you mentioned when we were chatting before we went on the air today, you've got to become good at prompting it. So,
Yes.
I mean, I think definitely if you're an entrepreneur and you're looking at starting up soon, take a half an hour a day or 20 minutes a day and just sit on ChatGPT and experiment with prompts. There's a lot of good content out there already too, where you can look for good prompts. Um, YouTube is becoming a little bit crazy, crowded with videos on Chat GPT. But if you're able to sort through that content and find some good, useful information, it can be a really good resource. There's some quirkiness to it. Like, for example, like we talked about, every time you engage with Chat GPT, it acts like it's the last time you're going to engage with it. So it always sort of signs off like, hey, good luck, or hey, have a nice day, or whatever. So, I mean, that can be a little bit weird. It's not like carrying on a conversation between you
Yeah.
and I where,
Yes.
we don't sign off until we know the conversation's over. But so, I mean, there's a little bit of quirkiness to it, but if you can get around that, it can be a really good resource tool for you as a young entrepreneur.
Definitely. I haven't used ChatGPT as much as you probably have, Tom. It's very good to bounce some ideas off of,
It
just to
is.
get some suggestions. In that sense, the critical thinking part, I would really recommend, right? With any coach, any mentor, the critical thinking is good, right? You're never
Yes.
going to blindly following someone's suggestions or ideas. It's your path. It's your responsibility. You are accountable for this. So, and it's your venture also. So you need to be able to think critically about it, and with AI even more, I guess so. In terms of peer coaching, that's a very interesting subject to me, because I think there's so many stories that people can share, right? So maybe not out of school, but when you get a couple of entrepreneurs who have a little bit of experience with different ventures or different ideas, and are kind of at the same stage with their current venture, then it's very interesting to get them to actually exchange experiences, to
Right.
actually facilitate that interaction, which is something that we do a lot in the playground, to really share the stories of it, right? The stories about, for example, a channel experiment. How can you get attention? What type of social media do you use? What's your experience with it? Do you use any paid media?
Right.
Uh, how about prototyping? What's the fastest way to get a prototype off the ground, right? How do you interact with customers? What type of questions do you ask these people? So there are so many stories and so many things that can go wrong, but also so many things that can go right, that can inspire other entrepreneurs. And that's
Absolutely.
a very interesting thing, especially when you do it on the long term. So you consistently share. You can use an accountability pod, or you can use maybe if you're part of a startup program or an accelerator or an incubator, maybe like a weekly lunch or something like that, to exchange stories. What have you done? How are you accountable for this? And how did it work? Right? Did it work out
Yes.
well? What can somebody else learn? And that's a very low key way of starting to experiment the benefits of coaching.
Yeah, and it's something that even local organizations like chambers of commerce could consider
Yeah.
putting on
Yes.
luncheon events once every quarter, perhaps, and
Yeah.
invite local entrepreneurs to come in and just talk business with each other. That can be really intimidating, though, and we can talk about that. I see a part 2 coming down the road for this episode. I want to mention too, real quick. Chris Hans, a follower of mine, shared a quick start guide from UNESCO talking about some of the roles that ChatGPT can play, as a motivator, co-designer, things like that. So thank you for sharing that. That should show up in the comments on today's webcast, and I can certainly share that link as well with my community. That would be great. I can't wait to take a look at that later on. So thanks for sending me down the rabbit hole again, Chris. I'll definitely take a look at that later on and see what that suggests as well. So we've run out of time, it looks like.
Yeah.
And again, I think we have a part 2 in our future on this subject, as
Yeah.
we kind of suspected.
Yeah. We kind of suspected that
Yes, we predicted that.
beforehand. Yeah. So let's maybe see if some final questions from our audience can appear. If you want to
Mike,
send in a question, we can also um,
Mike
address
made a
those
great
later
point
on.
too on the comment or on the chat that entrepreneurs don't need to work in a vacuum, and I think that's really important. I think there's entrepreneurs that feel like once they start a business, they sort of stitch a cocoon around themselves,
Yeah.
and then that they're alone in that pod by themselves, and that's not true at all. I mean, there's a whole community of people out there that are excited to help you. You've just got to have sometimes the courage, I would be the right word, to reach out to those folks. But I also think we need to do a better job sometimes as coaches or as educators of sort of, and I mean this in a good way, of getting in that entrepreneur's face and saying,
Yeah.
"Hey, I'm here and I want to help you," because
But what I'm seeing a lot lately on social media, especially on LinkedIn, is people offering office hours
right,
outside of university. So maybe $10 for a half an hour or a 1 hour conversation or something like that, which is, in terms of price, it's just ridiculous. It's not the real price, but you get support and you can get or people's advice, or you can get a couple of like suggestions where you could go for advice. So those are great initiatives. I think those are, sometimes they're marketing tools and sometimes they're for real, so you have to be kind of careful about it. But there are so many ways to come into contact with possible coaches or with people who can provide you with value.
well, an entrepreneurial coaching would be one of those areas where I would say that the old adage, "You get what you pay for," does not apply. That's one of the things I've really enjoyed about being in the entrepreneur space now for the last 25 years or so, or 30 years, is that we're a sharing community. I think there's this misconception that we're all competitors with each other and we're all guarding our ideas and whatever. We're really a sharing community. When I think of how many entrepreneurs unsolicited have reached out to me over the years to share an insight with me that might help me, that's pretty impressive. And I think a lot of that competitive drive thing is sort of a made up phenomenon, that makes it sounds really, really good on paper, but we are much more of a sharing community than one might anticipate. So
Yeah. Maybe let's finish off with that Steve Jobs quote about if you genuinely ask for advice or ask for a favor to people. I'm not sure exactly how the words go, but it was kind of the message of, if you genuinely ask for advice and help, I've not met anyone who wasn't willing to actually give it. That's what he said.
yeah,
There's
no,
people are generally good, and especially in the entrepreneurship community, people like to share,
right,
right? People like to actually work with entrepreneurs and do whatever they can to support, if you ask for it, if you get in touch. And that's just a good way. And you can always get no for an answer, but well,
right.
right?
We did get one question. I'll just take a stab at. How do you value your contributions as a coach? And I'm assuming what Frank is talking about there is like, if you want to start charging for your coaching, how do you put a value or a price tag on that coaching? That's a tough one, especially in the
Yeah.
United States, because there's so much free coaching available. And the other thing you have to understand about coaching, a lot of entrepreneurs engage with coaches at the time and the point in their life when they have no money. And that's one of the reasons why there's so much free coaching available. It's hard. Like as a consultant, there's consulting rates like $90 an hour or whatever, and you can find that information pretty easily. But finding value or coaching prices, if you will, is not as easy. I think because of a lot of that baseline coaching in the United States, at least, and in a lot of countries, is free to the
Yeah.
public, and you can go seek that out for free. So, I know there's coaches out there that make a living coaching, but I would say a lot of that is actually maybe more high level coaching.
And
Maybe
there's a lot of SME coaching as
yes,
well, right? So optimize your finances, how to leverage assets, things like that. Those coaches do make a living and they do have hourly wages. Those are more of an advisor role,
right,
as we've defined it at the start of this session. But coaching, as we talk about, like the lean startup coaches, very early phase. In Colombia, we had it through big government programs.
mm,
I think you in the US, maybe it's not government programs, but it's NGOs.
it's quasi-government. I mean, we have the Small
Yes.
Business Administration that kind of sponsors a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's sort of almost a private-public partnership in some cases.
Yes.
But again, I know you're going to smile at this, but I'll give Frank my standard answer. Go consult ChatGPT. ChatGPT can give you a rundown of what some coaches are charging in certain parts of the country, and then you can sort of make your own decision from that information. It is good for things like that. Now, be aware that ChatGPT is only trained up through September 2021. So all the data since then is not current. So you're getting a lot of pre-pandemic or up through the pandemic type of information. They really need to update that soon, but that you just need to be aware of that sort of quirk with ChatGPT. All right.
Great.
Yes.
Cool. I think that was an interesting session, and second part coming up, I would say.
For sure.
So it was great to talk with you today, Tom, and let's go for the next one.
Yeah, always great to talk to you too, and always great to engage with our great listeners and watchers out there commenting in the chat. And we love your questions. Keep them coming, and we'll be putting out an announcement about our next episode of the Entrepreneur Founder Webcast. So have a great week. Have a great next couple of weeks, and take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.